Morning. And some of you will have heard this story because if you were at the July conference here, you might have heard me share this story, but I just felt I should share it in this context. Hey, Jackie. And it's about John Newton. Some of you know John Newton. He was the slave trader who, by his own admission, was a vile man, an evil man, but was radically converted. And of course, he wrote the world's most famous, beloved hymn, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And he went on to become a pastor. And in his later years, he pastored the church in London. And I was there last month, and I visited his church, and I stood in his pulpit where John Newton would have preached. And I heard a story. This was the church history tour I was on with Ben Virgo. And I heard this story which kind of stuck with me. And it's about John Newton in the latter years of his life. He and his wife, Mary, who he affectionately called Polly, he and Polly were unable to have children. And so they adopted two nieces who had been orphaned. And the first was Eliza, who came into their household. They adopted Eliza and brought her into their house and church community. And then they adopted her cousin, Betsy, whose parents had also sadly died. And both girls grew up in their home. Well, sadly, one day, Eliza got tuberculosis and died. And then a few years later, John Newton's beloved wife, Polly, got cancer, and she also died, leaving Betsy to take care of her ailing uncle. And it really disturbed her. It really had an effect upon her mental health. Some people say that because of the deaths of those who were so close to her, who she loved so much, really affected her. She felt forsaken by God. She was fearful, despairing. Others say that she had some kind of nervous disorder that really afflicted her. But, she had dark thoughts. And so John Newton, not really knowing how to help her, took her to the doctor. And because doctors in those days really didn't know how to treat mental health, this is 1801, he committed her to the Royal Bethlem Hospital, which had a nickname back then, Bedlam. If you ever use the word Bedlam, that's where it comes from. It was a terrible place. The Royal Bethlem Hospital is actually still around today, the oldest mental health hospital in the world. But back then, it was worse than getting a prison sentence, being committed to the Bethlem Hospital. It was just down the road from where John Newton lived. The staff were known to be cruel. I mean, they would chain inmates to the wall without any access to the bathroom. They would give them ice-cold baths, thinking that would somehow help them. Bloodletting was common, where you put leeches on to suck your blood out. Thought that might help. The wealthy in London paid money to go and see the inmates act out. In fact, you could even dine at the Royal Bethlem Hospital. In their dining room, you could book a table and bring your friends and pay for an inmate to come and entertain you at your table. It was a tourist attraction. That's how terrible things were. And of course, very few made it out of there. I mean, many got worse. Many people died in Bethlehem. So you can imagine John Newton's anguish that his beloved niece had been committed to this place. So every day he would walk, I think it must have been about a quarter of a mile, with his cane. He'd walk down that street in London to the Royal Bethlem Hospital, and he would stand outside and stand under this window. And I stood there. I stood on that spot, imagining what it was like and he would wave. He'd wave at the window until a handkerchief, a white hanky, appeared and waved back. And that was their prearranged sign that she was okay. And every day he went. He'd bring someone with him because his eyesight was failing. And he'd say, "Can you see the hanky?" He'd be waving. "Can you see the white hanky yet?" "Yes, I can see it." "Are you sure you can see it?" "Yes, I can see it." And then he would be satisfied and he would walk all the way back home. Every day he did that. Rain or shine, in sickness or in health, John Newton walked down to the Royal Bethlem Hospital and he waved at that window until he saw that handkerchief. Every day for a year he did that. And after a year, Betsy was released. And actually, she recovered. Went on to live. You're making me cry now. Look at you. Look at you. She went on to live a normal life. She married an optician. It was his faithfulness. Every day, letting her know she was not forgotten. He was not going to give up on her. He would always be there for her. Right? Reflecting the faithfulness of Jesus, who said, "I will never leave you or forsake you." That is what carried her through. And I share that in light of some of the words that came this morning, in case there's anyone here who may be despairing, who may feel that God has forgotten or abandoned them, who may be having dark thoughts, who may feel imprisoned by their circumstances or a sickness. And I share that to remind you, to let you know God has not forgotten you. Right? He will never leave you. Listen, we were all spiritual orphans. And God adopted us into his family. We are his now because of Jesus. And Jesus said, "I will never leave you or forsake you." And it's his faithfulness, his loving faithfulness, that will carry us through until that day when we will all be healed and set free. Amen? And the fact that you're here today, by the way, the fact that you're here today is like you waving that handkerchief. I'm here. And Jesus may not physically be present with us, but the thing he has given us to remind us of his presence are the physical elements of the bread and the cup, representing his body and his blood. And we take communion regularly, because as Jesus said, he said, "As often as you do this, as often as you do this." You see, we're reminding ourselves and one another that what Jesus did on the cross has secured our eternal well-being. Right? This is his promise to us, that everything will be okay. I'm going to keep waving until you wave back to me. Everything is going to be okay. If you are trusting in Jesus today, everything is going to be okay. So will you join me now in sharing the bread and the cup? And if you have not put your hope and trust in Jesus yet, can I encourage you to do that today? Because he is knocking on the door of your life. Or maybe he's waving. And saying, if you will open the door, I will come in and eat with you and you with me.